Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Monday, the 13th of May 2024. Today we're looking at the UK Health Security Agency's containment laboratories. These are crucial for protecting the UK against the most dangerous pathogens, and the containment laboratories at Porton Down and Collingdale are near the end of their life. For a decade, the sites have been working with at least one issue for at least half of the time. And unless they're replaced, the UK will not be able to study highly infectious diseases. But the programme to create a new site has still not received full business case approval, despite the business case being approved in 2015. And overall, there's been longer-term planning for this programme. The costs of this programme have risen enormously, over 500%. And the latest estimate for when the new sites will be operational will be 2036 at best. So clearly we've got a lot to talk to our witnesses about today. This is absolutely crucial to public health and the security of our country, and we're delighted to welcome our witnesses today. Of course, we have Professor Dame Jenny Harries, who is the Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency. She's joined by Scott McPherson, who's the Strategy, Policy and the Programme's Senior Responsible Officer for the UK Health Security Agency. That's a mouthful, Mr. McPherson. I'm not sure if you're paid by word in your job title, but and then they're joined by Andrew Sanderson, who's the Director of Finance at the UK Health Security Agency. So we've got a lot of questions for you about the money, Mr. Sanderson. And of course, they're joined by Shona Dunn, who's the Second Permanent Secretary at the Department for Health and Social Care, which is the sponsoring department. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown to kick off. Sir Geoffrey.
Yes, good afternoon to our witnesses, and particularly to Professor Harris, that I'm not unsurprisingly coming to first. Could I, Professor Harris, take you to one of your responses to the Science and Technology Committee? Of course, we've got one of the members as an honoured guest today, but this was a question from the chair. You may remember it. And
the date, Sir Geoffrey?
Yes, it was very recent. It was the 28th of February, as you'll probably remember, Professor Harris. He asked at question 450, is it, that's you, UKHSA, responsible that our preparedness, our health security is adequately provided for? And you replied, the organisation is responsible for assuring its own preparedness for the things within its remit. So that slightly begs the question, are you just a science and research organisation, or are you responsible for policy in relation to public health? And your Strategic Plan 2023 to 2026 says you'll be ready to respond to all hazards to health. The ministerial direction to you provides strong national leadership on public health security and health protection. And indeed, the NAO, a recent report, UKHSA is responsible for protecting citizens from the threats of infectious diseases and a long list of other things. So which are you? Are you responsible? Are you a research and scientific organisation, or are you responsible for public policy?
We're definitely a research and scientific organisation. We're advisory. We have a policy team, and we support policy particularly through the Department of Health. But I suspect that the whole of the committee will recognise from the pandemic that one organisation cannot be fully prepared for and respond to all elements of a serious infectious disease. So we have critical components of that we're responsible for, and we align that with Department of Health. They hold the overall responsibility for health pandemic preparedness.
So obviously a pandemic is a slightly wider health problem just than protecting the public from infectious diseases. But is one of your key remits protecting the public from infectious diseases?
Yes, but we do that in partnership with a number of other areas. If I gave an example, for example, something like measles, which we're very aware of now, rising cases, there are key other contributors to that, so directors of public health, vaccine companies, a whole host of different components. But we do hold a very critical part in the science, evaluation of vaccine programs, for example, in providing advice to health professionals. A whole arena of different elements are definitely our responsibility.
So could I come on to the core of the report and your health campuses, your clinical research and laboratories? At paragraph 1.6, on page 14, the NAO says The COVID-19 pandemic has only further highlighted the critical needs for resilience across the modern highest containment laboratories. Can you tell the committee what the condition is at Colindale and Porton Down? You are ongoing maintenance. You said in 2008, I think, there were only 5 years left. You can't deliver even a new facility till 2036. It looks as though there may be a gap in your facilities. But can that gap be satisfactorily filled by the ongoing maintenance programme, or is there a real problem?
The short answer is we can continue to provide those facilities. The facilities are safe and we are not allowed to operate without that being the case. The facilities are serviced every 6 months. They are continuously upgraded to ensure that they're safe. They are inspected by by the Health and Safety Executive, and we respond immediately to any findings that are there. So the short answer is they are safe, they are continuing to operate, and in fact our latest information and review, as long as one of the cabinet lines for working in Porton is renewed within the next 4 to 5 years, suggests they will be able to be operational, as long as that upgrading continues, for 15 years on both sides. So there shouldn't be a gap. I'm sure we will come to this, as long as the new programme that I think will be the focus of this discussion comes into place and continues steadily as we go forward. It will be at risk, of course, if we can't progress that smoothly.
I just ask, is that 15 years from now or 15 years?
Yes, 15 years from now.
So if I may add, we did some, we got some external surveyors to supplement the work that our internal site team do at Porton, and that's the basis for concluding that we've got 15 years, provided, as Dame Jenny says, that it's properly maintained. That 15-year lifespan is sufficient to enable us to complete either the project at Harlow with a completion date of 2036 or a project at Porton with a completion date for high containment labs of 2038.
Just follow that question. I understand there have been certain derogations by the Health and Safety Executive. Does your answer still stand, Dame Jenny, even though those derogations are there? Why are the derogations there if you're saying that everything is satisfactory in the condition of these laboratories?
I may refer to Mr McPherson on the detail of those, but broadly, anything which we are required to do for health and safety reasons will be done, and the labs, basically, they come out of service. And in fact, one of the ways that we manage this is because we have 2 different labs, and we can ensure if one of them is down, the schedules for servicing or maintenance always are aligned so that the other one is operational.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Can I go on and ask you, why is this critical programme for protecting the UK against infectious diseases running so very late and over budget?
So, I mean, I would acknowledge, I think I've said to the Health Committee before that I felt the NAO report was really helpful for the reasons which we've said. This is really important. I see it as a critical point of public health protection, and the events of the pandemic particularly have brought that right into sight of the whole of the nation. So there have been delays, and there are some, again, the NAO report has set those out. But I think from conception to changes as we've gone through the programme, there are a number of different steps. And again, excuse me, I will turn to Mr McPherson in a moment just to go through those. But I think where we have had clear direction and delegation to move ahead, so within the business case process, that has taken place. What I think we've seen more recently is an appropriate, since the UKHSA has come into being, so bearing in mind we only started our real life in autumn of 2021, and this programme goes right back, I think, to around 2006, 2007. We have reviewed where we are in that time. We've taken on board the fact we're a new agency specifically here to manage a response to severe infectious diseases in a growing threat environment. We have reviewed the case up to then and concluded that this does need to progress, and we're very keen to progress it. I'll turn to Mr McPherson, if I may. He will go through the detail of any of those delays.
So I think the answer is there's no simple one reason why the programme has cost more and taken longer than was originally envisaged back in 2015 when the business case was done. As Dame Jenny says, I think the NAO report does an excellent job of setting out in a series of stages the reasons for the cost increases. If you start with the 2015 business case that PHE did of 530 million, that clearly excluded a number of categories that should have been included and which were added in the revised business case later in that year relating to contingencies, VAT and inflation. That's the reason why essentially in that same year you go from 530 to 888 million. But between then and 2020, I'd say there were the programme was progressing. We had bought the site, started work with 3 different construction partners who were not employed on pre-construction contracts, and the work that we were doing with those partners was developing the detailed design. I think we did some more detailed assessment of the site security requirements with some external security advisors. That led to much more accurate costings and schedules. Also in that time period, PHE took the decision that the scope should be increased. So that added the intention that the Harlow site would provide headquarters for the agency rather than having headquarters in London and bring together a large number of national functions on the site. And then when you add in inflation and VAT again to those additional costs, that's where you get to the 1.9 billion. Since then, to get to the 2023 business case, I'd say there were 3 main factors that drove the cost increases. And again, this is set out in some detail in the NAO report. The first is inflation. So that was a period of exceptionally high inflation, particularly during 2022. And then you add extra VAT on top of that. There's costs of delay. So essentially, any delay essentially just increases costs through a combination of you're providing your programme costs for a longer time period, and it's also shifting the delivery schedule further into the future where the inflation is increased. Yeah. And then finally, there were some further changes to the scope of the programme, but in part due to decisions that PHE took about what its requirements were, but also some external changes. So, for example, new building regulations came in. Part L of those building regulations required different standards in relation to net zero and climate change, which required us to change the cooling system we had in our energy plant. There were also some regulatory changes from the Health and Safety Executive around fumigation requirements, and we were anticipating a potential banning of formaldehyde, which meant we needed to redesign the fumigation, which alone drove a cost increase of 50 million. So there's a long series of different reasons that drive the cost increases.
So, Professor Harries, the NAO report sets that all out pretty carefully. We know all that, with great respect to you, Mr. McPherson. But if you ask for 5 different reviews, which this report sets out, with the same set of facts, why would you expect any of the 5 to come up with a different answer? You're a professor. Somebody gave you the same set of facts and asked you to do 5 different reviews. Would you come up with a different answer?
I think you would be looking, objective assessment and critical analysis, you would be looking for a number of reasons for why that might be the case. You would be looking at governance of the programme, and happy to go into that. You would be looking at the context in which this was operating. I mean, one of the obvious things here is there's been significant organisational change. There have been 3 different health protection agencies running through it, and each time, as Mr McPherson has said, the context and the settling of those organisations will change as well. The threat levels around will change. That was one reason why you may get a prioritisation of issues. And I give an example. I think certainly when I came in as the Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency, it was at a time of considerable concern, I think, before we had really got past the peak of the pandemic threat, this particular pandemic threat. And the ambitions for the organisation as provided to me and the background funding envelopes and what have you, and the breadth of that ambition were not clear, I think, at the start of the organisation. And so many of these factors have settled as we've gone through. So I accept you can look through multiple different lenses. We've tried to, I think, look through the ones where we have a responsibility to manage since October 21 and make sure that that governance process, which is the one to, I think, predominantly to keep the system and the programme going. And then we do have to work clearly with colleagues at the Department of Health and with ministers to ensure that the programme is fitting what the country needs from a wider perspective as well.
So notwithstanding the explanation that Mr McPherson has given, to go in 2015 from a projected cost of 530 million to a projected cost, and we're not even finished yet in 2023, of 3.2 billion, it's going some. Now, you've been in post, if your biogs are correct, for exactly 2 years. You came to the post in April 2021. What have you been doing to press the Department of Health to give you a budget to get on with doing this vitally needed public work?
So I may refer to Ms Dunn, because we have been working very closely with the Department of Health, and the recognition of how important this is for the long-term biosecurity. I mean, another contextual element is that actually the country, quite rightly in my view, has developed a new biosecurity strategy in that time and is developing different programmes of work to which this will also contribute. So that's even well without outside the Department of Health. But I think we have, if I look at what we've done, so I think before we came into post, I came into post, we had a figure of about 1.9 billion. I think actually just with the inflationary pressures, that comes out at about 2.45 today anyway, without any delay at all. And I think our latest estimate is 3.2 billion. In 2021 and early 2022, we reviewed where we were with this as a new organisation as best we understood that. We did select the Harlow option on review and felt that coincided, as the NEO report says, with our new remit. And we submitted a submission for options to ministers in February in 2023. And there have been a number of strategic reviews since then, to which we have contributed as best we can and in as timely a way as we can. It is a very complex subject, and I think the other thing to say is where we've been asked to review different options, as the NAO report says. So the original science hub, if you like, at Harlow is not the same as the provision at Porton. It's the critical component, the CL4 high containment labs, is the same, is what we're proposing. Some supporting laboratories is the same, but some of the other additional features, so things like an envisaged teaching and training centre, which is Harlow, those are not, it's a slight sort of apple and pear situation. They're not directly comparable, and so it's right that we look at those. And of course, we absolutely recognise that in the current financial context, if something is not affordable, then we have to review what is. I think my responsibility is to make sure, and I say I'm very keen to be here today, that these facilities are built in the right time frame so we can use our scientific knowledge to protect the nation.
It's done. Professor Harries is giving a good fist at trying to cover up a situation that is very unsatisfactory. When are you going to give her a budget and the instruction to go for a full business case to get Treasury approval so we can get this thing started? Because the longer it goes on, the more inflation is going to take over, the more costs are going to rise. The sooner you get on with it, the sooner it'll be finished, the sooner the public will be better protected. So when are you going to give her the go-ahead?
Thanks, Geoffrey. So, first of all, just to agree with the point that Professor Harries made, it is not the department and UKHSA, UKHSA work really closely together on this. It's not the case that UKHSA sort of sit on one side of a fence and the department sits on the other. We have very, very close engagement, and the department and ministers have been very focused on the strategic importance of the capabilities that will be provided by the Science Hub throughout the discussions. As Professor Harries has said, there have been a number of points in time over the years that she has been involved with this, where there has been cause for ministers to want to review the position and review the strategic alignment of the existing programme with the needs for the country going forward. They have had advice, which mostly, well, I think entirely actually, has been joint advice, shared advice, that they have always had access to the intelligence and insight of UKHSA in those discussions. They, as Professor Professor Harries has pointed out, are considering their position on the Science Hub programme in the round, alongside other pressures and priorities for the department. they have a responsibility, as you would rightly hold them to account for, or hold us to account for, to consider value for money and affordability and all the other things. They are doing that. They've considered that. And there is a process ongoing, discussions between ministers, and they will reach a conclusion in the coming weeks or months. I can't give you a timetable for that, but that is under active consideration, and they understand the importance of moving forward.
Answer down. Are you saying that there will be a decision by the end of the year?
I cannot give you a guarantee, Sir Geoffrey, on when a decision will come out. That is for ministers to determine. They need to take the time to consider where they want to come out on this position. They are seized of the urgency of it. I think that's the important point I'm making. They are seized of the urgency.
What about the spending review? Because with the timing of the spending review and the election, kind of, you could say, well, is real, whether it's unfortunate or not, is the reality is it's going to be difficult to have a spending review this autumn. Mm-hmm. So does that have an impact on decisions of funding?
So they are seized of the importance of making a decision so that UKHSA can be given the certainty they need to take the next steps on the programme. They understand the timing constraints, they understand the implications of not moving forward currently. So they are seized of the urgency. To be fact, we're not in a position where we've been talking about does this decision need to be made this side or that side of a spending review. Ministers have the information they need. And
okay, but the point is that a spending review doesn't happen in the autumn. It's likely to be a good 6 months at least after that, just because of the normal rhythm of fiscal events and so on. Mm-hmm. So there must be an impact. If the spending review doesn't happen in the autumn, that the ministers can't necessarily agree additional money, or would it come out of somewhere else from the department?
I think the critical question, which as the NEO report points out, is the programme proceeding at Harlow? That is currently the stated position. Is the programme proceeding at Harlow? Is that an affordable option? Are there other options? That's what they are considering at the moment. There is then, once a position is reached on that, then there's a lot of work to do to develop the next stages of the programme business case. So I think that's work that will need to be done in any case and will take some months. So I don't think the timing of the spending review is a critical consideration in this at this point.
So one more question. Can we just eliminate one key element of Professor Harries' reasons for delays, and that's the reason that when you purchased the site at Harlow, it was purchased for a C4 laboratory. You're now saying it might be a corporate headquarters and training establishment. I'm a chartered surveyor.
No, the training establishment is a bit that's not going to happen.
All right, corporate headquarters.
So the intention for the Harlow site was that it would still deliver the full scope of the original 2015 business case, so high containment laboratories for the whole of the agency. But in addition, it would have the headquarters, national functions, and a training centre. That's the full scope of the Harlow programme.
National headquarters and training centre.
Yes.
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 Correct.
So that's training centres and corporate headquarters have been built in relatively short times, hundreds of thousands up and down the country. So that is not an excuse for the delay. And if necessary, you could build those or buy those somewhere else. Surely the critical factor in all of this is to build this C4 containment laboratory. That's what you need to be concentrating on. Not the headquarters, not the training centre, but the C4 training laboratory, isn't it?
I completely agree, Geoffrey, that the critical capability is the C4 high containment labs. And I think everybody understands that.
Surely, whatever else, that's what you need to be concentrating on and getting a Treasury decision for.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome Graham Stringer from the Science and Technology Select Committee, who's guesting with us today. Mr. Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. If I can go back to Geoffrey's original question, Professor Harries. When you were last before the Science and Technology Committee, you explained to the committee that you really had three hats on, if you remember. As a medical professional, as a second permanent secretary, and as the chief executive of an arm's length body. In the follow-up question about any potential conflicts, you said you had to think very, very carefully about whether there were conflicts between those three hats, which is sensible, but I've thought a lot about your answer since, and it doesn't really answer how you resolve those potential conflicts. Can you tell us a bit more? Because it's usually not satisfactory for people to have three quite separate responsibilities.
Mr. Did you want me to do that in relation to this particular problem,
yes,
if you like? And I understand that. I would say in many ways it was similar perhaps when I was Deputy Chief Medical Officer. I had a medical professional role and a government role. It's not often that you do need to think carefully. It's an important checkpoint for me, actually, and quite helpful in thinking and considering topics. But usually they are not actually in conflict, because as a civil servant you are serving the public as well as your ministers, and you are trying to deliver the right thing for the professional role that you've been given. With my CEO hat on, I need to deliver effectively and efficiently and manage my organisation. And again, with the decision, we will be, I'm really keen to progress rapidly on this for the reasons which have been stated. So I think there's, and I have a responsibility to, for example, maintain scientists to be able to work in these facilities once we have them. With a GMC hat on, with my medical hat, I look at this. I have a higher professional training in public health medicine within that. So clearly I'm looking at the infectious disease and other hazard risks to that and the risks to public health. They don't differ from the conversation we've had. These are urgent facilities that need building, and I don't think anybody is suggesting otherwise. I also have a responsibility to flag if I think anything is unsafe in terms of clinical quality. For the reasons which we've said, I don't think that's the case. And then I think as a second permanent secretary, I need to work with my parent department to ensure that ministers are fully appraised of the risks and the opportunities of these issues. But then it's for ministers then, which I think is the wider point, to decide where that fits within all of the other contextual issues which they have to deal with. And in fact, one of the reasons, which I think is clear in the NAO report, that we are considering in detail the Porton site rather than the original Harlow site, is because actually it looks to give us the ability to build the necessary parts, the high containment level for laboratories, and I might just add, it does need supporting. You can't just plonk one down, it needs a supporting infrastructure with it, but to build that necessary part, and clearly, as Ms Dunn said, I've provided that advice to the Secretary of State, and I have been listened to very carefully.
I suppose the obvious point of conflict really comes at the point of the question that anybody thinking about this is bound to ask. If we're losing capacity in these very secure laboratories and regularly losing capacity, are we, secure the right word, can we deal with any epidemic from one of these very dangerous pathogens? That's the obvious question, but I think where it relates to a possible conflict, you advise ministers, but you also have a responsibility as a health professional, if the ministers don't agree, to say something publicly. What I'm interested in is how you deal with that conflict.
I have stood on platform through the pandemic and given answers and responses which perhaps are not always totally in accord with all the political persuasion at the time, because my job, I think, and the one I've been charged by ministers, is to give evidence-based commentary, and that's the job that I have been given. It's the same advice that I would provide to them, and the public if you're a public health physician, the public are your patients in the way that the population is your patient, if you like, and that rather than individual. But I think I think what you're getting at is if the line forward, if you like, on this appears to be blocked, what do you do about it if it's a critical concern? And I think there are two comments I would like to make. I am very sure, and I think you will have heard that when I spoke to the Health Committee, and Ms Dunn has said this now, that the Department of Health and ministers are very, very carefully listening to this. And in fact, I think it's one of the reasons why we have been asked to look very closely at an alternative model within a 2 billion context, because that actually allows us to manage the critical public health element whilst reducing the overall cost when there are a number of other areas of investment required for the country. And the second point is we're part of the national security infrastructure. So my conversations link, for example, to other chief scientific advisors across government, to various ministers and senior officials contributing to national security discussions. So it's not simply my ministers that I need to appraise, and I'm very assured that all of those groups of individuals are aware of this and actively considering it.
Well, I mean, I'll come back to that point at the very end, if I may. But can you assure this committee and the public, I suppose, that we are now in a position to respond to any epidemic from a dangerous pathogen? Because there must be one of the reasons, presumably, that the laboratories have to be closed down is the pressure on them. And if we were threatened with a pandemic, there would be more pressure on those laboratories. So can you reassure the public that we can respond to a bird flu epidemic or some other pathogen?
Please pull me back if I'm not answering your question, because that's actually, from my position, quite a difficult question to answer. There is, what are these high containment laboratories used for, and what is their purpose, whether it be in a pandemic or outside it? And then there are, what are the infrastructure and general response requirements to respond to a pandemic? And if I use COVID as an example, or a novel pathogen, what tends to happen is, until we understand the characteristics of the pathogen, they will be dealt with, researched and cases diagnosed in these high containment laboratories. Once we understand the characteristics, it's very likely that we can move those out to a lower grade facility entirely appropriately. So the issue here is, if we had a strange imported case of a viral hemorrhagic fever, for example, yes, we can do that, and it's often we will get handfuls of cases. If you actually had a high consequence infectious disease causing pathogen where characteristics were really significant and we had large numbers of cases, it's unlikely that any country would actually have this level of facility to be totally diagnostically confirming. You would do it a different way. But the key point here for me is to reassure you and the public that the labs that we have, which are the labs that we have had, I mean, Porton, has been around for 55 years, which is one reason why we need to replace it. But actually, it's a very good lab. It's a WHO Centre of Excellence for Applied Biosecurity. And it can continue to fulfil that role just in the same way it has done until now.
Well, that is reassuring, except that what the report shows us is that the laboratories have their capacity reduced fairly regularly, presumably because they're not safe. If they were reduced by 100%, presumably this work couldn't be done. So how can you reassure us that that won't happen?
So it's the time taken out of action. So a laboratory will not be working if it isn't up to standard. It will be serviced and out of action, but the other one will be. So it's not. So every time a laboratory is working, it is working 100% safely. And it's why we have a different service issue. The issue about the lifespan of these is, if we roll forward, and I think Mr McPherson has signalled this in his answer, if we roll forward, there comes a point in time, not yet, when the time out of service starts to become greater than the time in service, and the costs of maintaining it completely outweigh the costs of rebuilding it. And so there is a spot in the middle of this where we say, because of the lead time to actually have a functioning, built and commissioned laboratory, there's a point where you say this is the point of no return, if you like. We should be building something new. And that's the sort of the time frame that we're looking at now. So my concern is not about what we have now. It is about if we have a delay and that 15-year life expectancy starts to move down and we aren't able to maintain them as it gets older and older, then we will not have built the replacement in time, and then we will go back to Sir Geoffrey's point, which is, would we have a gap?
And again...
Okay.
Geoffrey made the point. I mean, this project seems to have made all the mistakes it's possible to make in a large project of changing what the client wants from something. That always adds cost to things. But have you had chance to look at whether the decision to go to Harlow was the right decision? And did you take advice, or your predecessors take advice, from the Chief Scientific Officer on this matter?
So the short answer to your last point is I've spoken both to the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Health, and to all of the Chief Scientific Advisors who meet across government. They are very aware, as I'm saying now, they are agnostic, if you like, about the location of the facility, but we're all united in the fact that we need a facility. In terms of the actual project design to start with, I mean, clearly this, I take my responsibility exactly as I should do, but I wasn't part of the original decision making, and it's difficult. I mean, we've obviously looked at the documents as far as we can, and what we have done is exactly in 2022, once the initial stage of the pandemic had gone down, we look back at all of the plans and the proposed benefits from that in the new context and with the new organisation. And concluded that was, at the time, the right way to go. But if you put a financial bracket around it, for reasons which is contextually quite the, exactly as ministers may wish to choose, then clearly we can't deliver that output in Harlow. And as I keep repeating, my concern is that we have the protective laboratories for the country. I can make them work wherever they are, and I can build my organisation to rally round them wherever they are. I just need the certainty of being able to deliver them. And when we have the remit, I can assure you I will be very keen to be absolutely moving this forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer. Jonathan Janoglian.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to look at the business case, and I'm looking at the NAO report, paragraph 210, and it says UKHSA's programme business case in 2023 again concluded that Harlow was the best value for money option, although with rising costs the absolute benefit cost ratio was marginal and only assessed at 1.02, whereas the Porton Down option was seen to have a ratio of less than 1 at 0.86, meaning that the costs outweigh the benefits. So I think, firstly, to Mr. McPherson, why is the absolute benefit cost ratio of the Harlow option so low?
So, I think there's a key point that the NAO report also makes, that the figures you're quoting for the benefit cost ratio are based on a very limited number of benefits that have been assessed and that are relatively easy to quantify. There's a large number of other benefits that haven't been quantified in the business case. If it would be helpful, I could explain in a little more detail how the benefits were calculated.
Yes, please.
So there's essentially two main elements to the benefits business. That one is delivery of public health benefit, which is fundamentally what the agency exists to do. Our work protects people from infectious diseases. In doing so, it reduces the number of people who get ill. There's a benefit for the individual people. There's a benefit for the NHS of reduced numbers of patients going to hospital, so we reduce costs for them. There's an economic benefit from people not being off work and being sick. And there's a general economic benefit from increased GDP that arrives from that. The main way in which the benefits are being calculated is by looking at a scenario where we have a future pandemic, and it's calculated on an assessment of our ability to respond quickly to that pandemic. And the key thing that drives the benefits that are quantified in the business case is a calculation that we think, with the revised facilities that we would get through the construction of the new high containment laboratories, we would enable the deployment of a new vaccine in a pandemic scenario 2 weeks quicker than would otherwise happen. So 2 weeks is a relatively small amount. If you reflect back on the COVID pandemic, it took roughly 10 months to get from the start of the pandemic to deployment of a vaccine. 2 weeks, therefore, doesn't sound like very much. Even that is enough to drive the vast majority of the benefits, so roughly in the order of 5 billion. And the calculation we've done is extremely conservative. It essentially reflects the fact that the new laboratories have been more flexible, so we'd be able to run experiments in parallel rather than doing sequentially. That there's a modular design, which means there'd be a benefit in moving in different equipment depending on the particular pathogen we were dealing with much quicker than we could currently do in very constrained laboratories. And also there's some technical benefits. For example, at the moment our laboratories need to be fumigated overnight, so if you've done an experiment one day you have to wait for the next day to do some more work. We'll be able to do that much quicker. So all of those technical changes to the capability of the lab means we're confident that that would speed up various stages of the process.
Okay. So with all of these benefits that you're describing, why is the difference between the two so very small?
So the difference is that in both options we would build the high containment facilities, and that's what drives the majority of the benefits. The main difference between the Harlow option and the Porton option is the Harlow option includes some additional benefits that derive from co-location of services. So at the moment we've got 2 scientific teams split across our Porton and Colindale sites. If we proceed with the Harlow plan, they'd all be co-located on one site. And so you get the opportunity for scientists working together to collaborate much more closely, and that's what drives a series of...
Okay, but in reply to Sir Geoffrey's question, Dame Jenny said that you can't, the sites aren't compatible. I think you said it's like comparing apples and pears, whereas I think, Mr McPherson, you're saying that the vast majority of it is all the same. So,
if I could just go, if you took the whole site plan at Harlow, that is not what is proposed to shift to Porton in totality, but actually the main components are exactly the same. And in fact, some of the investments, quite a considerable amount of the design work, which has gone on for Harlow, for the H50 block, the main CL4 component, we are hoping, we can't confirm yet, we would literally lift and shift that design and build it at Harlow, and therefore take that expenditure with us into the new programme. I think the other, if I could just add to what Mr McPherson said as well, the differential in costs as well is because there is a if you like, the Harlow site is ready to go, and the Porton one we will need to do more planning and permission and procurement and what have you. That time frame, exactly as we've just said before, is the bit that pushes the cost yet further into the future. So a lot of the differential on costs is actually about moving the programme outwards.
Okay, so one for Mr Sanderson. You haven't had a question yet. So how confident are you that the programme will deliver value for money?
I think, as Mr McPherson has said, the approach to benefit quantification has been actually pretty conservative and is mainly focused on teasing out the differential between the Porton and Harlow options. We haven't yet got to the stage of having the kind of formally updated business case that goes through its kind of gate of approval. But
that's another review.
No, that's just a standard, gateway on the approach of a major project. So at that point, we would expect a sort of richer appraisal of the benefits to be there. And I think on the basis of evidence so far, I think we could be pretty confident about the overall value for money of the facilities, given the kind of criticality as a kind of essential kind of national infrastructure.
See, the problem is, I'm coming into this quite fresh, I'll admit, but I'm hearing about review after review after review. Could there be any truth in the idea that the Harlow project is unpopular with, say, the staff, and so it's become an unwritten policy that you just go for a few years, have another review, another few years, have another review, hoping that it's going to sort of even out?
Shall I answer,
yes, please,
that one? I'm very sure I could find staff across the organisation, some of whom think it's a great idea and some of whom don't. That's not the point. The point is they are signed up to do a job, and we have to plan, I think, for the health protection for the country. And actually, there are, if you go back, and we've looked back at documents before, there was a lot of planning about staff movements, and it varies in different ways, and that is about equal. So with the Porton site, the cost, if you like, required around staff movements is pretty small, because those teams already work across 2 sites for the reasons we've said, and so a small number of senior staff would need to move from Colindale to Porton, so you could argue risks might be lower, staff already working. On the other hand, a new science hub in an area where science, pharmaceutical industries and what have you, we are working directly with pharma now in a completely different way than the public sector has before, and that's important for upstream investment and economic growth. That might be very exciting in a different way.
Near Cambridge.
Yes, but it also runs the risk of us losing all our staff to the pharmaceutical companies that are trying to work with us. So it's a little bit swings and roundabouts, which is why I say actually the critical thing is that we build the infrastructure, and then we can make sure, I mean, we are an attractive place to work because we're quite unique for scientists. Even if they want long careers to stay with us, that is a risk. They need the certainty. So I think actually the key point for staff is, can we please, they will say, please give us the certainty of what we're going to do, and that will run with it. So there may well be mixed views, but with the right messaging, enthusiasm and the right vision to deliver it, then I don't think it will be a problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drumby. I've just, we were talking earlier about your role in delivering national security. We've also looked at the Animal Health Centre in Weybridge, which is desperately in need of investment, and there's a big risk there. How much are you working with DEFRA on, sorry, I should say the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which is responsible for that?
So we work with them routinely on incident response. So you can imagine cows in the US are a topic of common conversation. Hopefully you will be pleased to hear. So we work with them routinely. When it comes to the actual sites and looking at trying to understand this programme, what the opportunities might be, not only do we work with DEFRA, we've, different sites, we've just said, have different opportunities. So MHRA are closer to the proposed Harlow site, and there are opportunities potentially that we try to explore there. There are others working with DSTL. Again, we work with them routinely in Portham, but this could be a different step. So we have looked at that. We also look internationally, so detailed work with Canada, who are known as international experts on this. I was personally out in South Korea a little while ago, inquiring as well about, they've just built a new facility. So we take advice everywhere. In terms of the actual delivery, and your point, I think, about a grip on delivering the premises and keeping them maintained, I hope I've given assurance that we have really good programmes running to maintain the health and safety of the labs and to plan ahead, and that's one reason.
Well, I'll come into a little bit more of that, and other colleagues will as well, but we've looked at that, and we know that if there were two zoonotic diseases breaking out at the same time, it wouldn't cope. We know that you've given us some assurance today that you're not going to have a gap, but that still there's a lot can slip twixt cup and lip between where we are now and getting the facilities so that they are performing as efficiently and as well as they can be. So, as in your role responsible for UK health security, how much does it keep you awake at night that you've got the animal side and the human side both going through major change and in need of a huge taxpayer investment?
It's clearly important, and I use the H5N1 in cows in the US at the moment. Clearly we would work on this routinely and are looking and thinking with all our relevant scientific colleagues. It's a good example of why we are now in a One Health world, which is both zoonotic and human, because we're moving.
Perhaps we should explain to anyone who might be thinking they're tuning in to talk to people about human health, what we mean by zoonotic health.
So if we think about animal infectious disease, human infectious disease, and the link with the environment, the One Health agenda means you cannot separate those. You have to be thinking about them together all of the time. And that is well accepted now. And I think it's been an artificial division potentially historically, but one that has worked. As we now starting to get things like the impacts of climate change, mass migration of populations, changes in risks and threats, global travel, all of those things start to become much more relevant. So that's part of the growing threat risk. So we work with them closely. I think it's important for the country that both facilities are built. We have looked to see whether there are ways of working directly together.
That's what
but the work that's done is different. We need to work with AFA and with DEFRA, but actually we don't think that we can use the same facilities, if you like. And a similar applies for some of the DSTL work as well.
You and Ms Dunn were talking earlier about the other engagement that you've got across, well, particularly you and Dame Jenny, other engagement across other Whitehall departments. So we've mentioned DEFRA, presumably you mentioned DSTL, so Defence, presumably Home Office, because Home Office Science, and are there any other key departments, business and trade, or that you're working with?
Well, increasingly with some of that starts to move into not so much specific to this work, but our work more generally around things like vaccine development and you We do quite a lot of commissioned work.
But for the work that the sites would cover, they're the main departments that I've listed
yes.
that you'd be working with. And you just to be really explicit for the record, they are completely on board with this. Are they? I mean, all the money though would come from the Department for Health. not from these other departments?
Well,
or is there a cross-government effort? Is there one of those heroic cross-government efforts which will require an innovative new technology in order to deliver this, which makes us feel very reassured if that's the case? But seriously, how much are those other departments contributing in effort, money?
So it is very much, this is very much still the health focus, despite the fact we're all working within a One Health agenda. So I think it's right that we're working primarily with the Department of Health and through our ministers. But as I said earlier, actually, there have been cross-government discussions to understand, particularly with the Chief Scientific Advisors, where the different facilities are across the country and the relevant status of them and states of repair and proposed plans ahead. So I think that has been very strong in the last year or so, and it's an area where I think UKHSA has helped promote that understanding.
And I just want to pick up on some points Mr. Nogley was raising about staff and where they're based. And we've seen, I think, over the many years Sir Geoffrey and I have been on this committee, we could list a number of examples where people don't want to move. So recently we talked to Defence Digital, and they've got some interesting sites around the country which aren't necessarily the hot hubs for tech experience. So hence they're setting up a hub in Manchester. In Stockport, the General Register Office is based. It's got some very specifically talented staff there who are there and make Stockport a centre for them, but they might not necessarily want to move somewhere else. We saw a closure of the then business department's education element in Sheffield, and they were all supposed to move to London. That went down very badly. And we've seen, on the other hand, the campus in Darlington expanding. So we see movement of civil servants, but there are certain professional groups, there can be a risk that they don't want to move, or the other side, that you actually create those jobs. Now, you were hinting that you might lose people to pharmaceutical companies in the Cambridge corridor, but are there also opportunities for skilling people up in Essex, say, to go and have those jobs in Harlow, so that you're creating a whole new skills base for the UK? And how are you balancing that? Or is that lower down your agenda because your primary function is to deal with UK health security?
I mean, there are a number of different aspects of that. One is that definitely was considered in the benefits assessment of the original Harlow case. You can apply it as well, though, in different ways. For example, I know in Porton Down, the development or the idea to have a science park there, and grow that would equally be attractive for different reasons. There's an interesting point actually around pharma, because as we're working more with them in an appropriately governance way, but it's really important to develop upstream products as far as you can ahead of pandemics. It's very clear actually that we don't have the supplies in the country of all of the scientists we need. So there are opportunities for us to work jointly to develop that, and actually have rotating staff going in and out to understand different ways. So
that drives me to, we have at the moment it's levelling up, but every government has some plan to balance out the economy and bring up jobs into areas where there aren't so many jobs. So has that been a factor, or are you having any discussions across government more widely about job creation, skill development in relation to the area that you're responsible for?
It was definitely a factor for the earlier Harlow plans. I think the focus of the most recent plans has been much more to do with the primary responsibility to ensure that we have facilities within the current financial context. Okay. But wherever we are, we do try and encourage diversity in our staff. We have particular programs, an Accelerate program, for example, to ensure that we have leaders coming through, including in our scientists as well.
So Geoffrey's gone through the numbers, and we don't need to go through them all because the NEO in their report lay everything out very clearly. But it is an absolutely exponential increase in cost. So what's gone wrong with the governance and assurance procedures? We've looked at quite some egregious examples on this committee, as you'd imagine, and this is kind of up there in the top 10, if I'm being generous.
Top half dozen.
Yes, well, there you go. So Geoffrey's harder than I am. Why? What? Looking back, you weren't here all the time, and we know Dame Jenny, but what's gone wrong in the organisation? And we'll come to Mr. Sanderson as well.
So I think there are lessons to be learnt from that, and actually, because I want to, whether or not it's in my sort of chief executive role era, I want to make sure that they don't get repeated as we go through. So I want rapid delivery. and to keep tight controls on it. So I think the governance around a programme is really important. I think when we look back, there has been a governance programme in there, and in fact, as I say, it is part of the infrastructure programme, and therefore it automatically has checks. Equally, it reports into the Department of Health governance process. So it's not that the programmes haven't had a governance around them. I think
we're almost more worried. They've had governance around them, and all this has still happened.
So I think there has been high degrees of uncertainty, genuinely, and then perhaps some that as we go
uncertainty in the decision.
No, in the numbers. So if we look back in 2015, my understanding is that the original case estimate was around 530 million, and within the same year, with the VAT and various other elements, actually it was 888 million.
Well, that brings me to Mr. Sanderson. Why on earth, Mr. Sanderson? I mean, we look at big projects, all that. Inflation, okay, that's been a more recent issue. Contingency costs, VAT, these are basics in running a major programme. Why were they not factored in?
So I can't speak to that stage of the programme, I'm afraid, before our time in UKHSA. I would agree. I think
I mean, you agree that it is highly unusual not to have worked out that they might be an issue.
Absolutely, I think, yes, that seems clear. I think picking up some points Mr. McPherson made at the start, I think one of the positive developments that clearly the programme has made is to get much stronger specialist expertise to support it in terms of coming up with the costings and the kind of financial projections. So I think there's been a much stronger kind of basis for credibility and trust in the figures in the latter stages than I think there clearly was at the beginning.
But I'm going to come to Ms. Dunn, and I'll come back to Mr. Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, I was going to say, I think you're entirely correct in expressing some surprise about some of the things that were missed out early in that 2015 case, and through the sort of governance that we have at the moment, and indeed as we've been considering our options, we've certainly considered the lessons that have been learnt from that, and I think we would say there are three big ones. I mean, the first was, as Mr. Sanderson was about to say, was saying, it's quite clear that the level of expertise on specialist works of this type that was involved in the initial cost estimate was not what was subsequently applied. And so some of those costs were significantly underestimated.
Sorry, so just to unwrap that. So are you saying scientists wrote up the case and they wouldn't have thought about the VAT and the other costs, or that finance people got it wrong because they weren't talking to the scientists? Which I
think it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
So I think there was both some.
And the Infrastructure Projects Authority, where was that in?
So the back in 2015, I think that when the initial
that was
initial
the MPA
case,
then.
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, the Major Projects Authority, just for people who
the initial case that was produced, I think that was absent. I think the second thing was that clearly there had not been the opportunity at that point in time to engage, from what I have seen, to engage the construction market properly, and so understanding the realities of the design process and the build process had not been fully factored in. And then the third issue that certainly I think has been a learning, and that Mr. McPherson has referred to, and Dame Jenny has referred to as well, is the importance of that cross-government collaboration and really understanding what the needs are of a wider group of people, which has and organisations, which has had some impact on scope and specification. So there were definitely some things there that I think, with learning across government on major programmes, I would like to think would be much less likely to happen today, and are certainly considerations that we look at closely in the context of the governance arrangements we have in place.
Okay. I mean, well, we'll take that as it is. But Mr. Sanderson, we've still got two options in play still. And, we know, and as Mr. Stringer said, the more the client starts, is not deciding on the final programme or altering what might be happening, that we see costs escalate. Dame Jenny's been very open about if it, pushes it out, it becomes more expensive. So why have we been riding two horses, or has UKHSA and its predecessors have been riding two horses for such a long period of time? It feels, as Mr. Stringer was saying, that, or was it Mr. Ginogli was saying, that there might just be other reasons behind this, because it's very expensive.
Riding two horses?
Well, looking at both, we have the Harlow plan, and now we're looking back to shrinking back to Porton Down, but the money that's sunk into Harlow is still a significant amount of money. Until there's a decision made to narrow down, we're spending a lot of money riding both horses.
Exactly. I think the renewed focus on the Porton option was in response to a clear direction that the costs of the Harlow project were going to exceed the agreed £2 billion envelope that had been set back in 2020. So that was what I think up until that point there wasn't particular focus on the Porton based option. It was very much central focus on Harlow. So it was the work in response to that that has led the programme to look at what the alternatives might be and see what comparator project could be done that lived within the available funding envelope, albeit by kind of constraining the scope.
I mean, this funding envelope is very elastic. 530 billion, now 3.2 billion. I mean, it is. If we weren't the Public Accounts Committee, we'd be on the floor with shock. But sadly, we've seen other problems like this too. I wanted to go to you, Mr. McPherson. You're the senior responsible owner now. You had, but it's worth reminding everyone of your CV. You're not talented civil servant that you are. You came to this in 2021. Right. And you've previously worked crime, police and fire, justice and courts, director of law rights and international. And Department for Energy and Climate Change, and in the Cabinet Secretariat. So what other big projects like this have you been senior responsible owner for?
When I was in the Home Office, I set up...
Did I miss out the Home? Oh, no, that was
there's a number of other
the fire and crime, yeah.
So in the biggest project I've been responsible for is in the Home Office, where we set up the police uplift programme to recruit an additional 20,000 police officers, which I was there in the initial stages of setting up and successful delivery for the first year until I left the Home Office, and then it was managed by other people. I've managed other
So projects. That isn't in the top 10 of Home Office failures, so that's good, well done.
I'm pleased about that. And then other projects, for example, in the Ministry of Justice, I was responsible for major projects to introduce a new judicial pension scheme. So this would be the first major construction project that I've been there.
And how long are you going to be around? I mean, is this full-time? You're 100% on this, or do you have other responsibilities?
No, so I have a much wider role, and I think I'm described as the interim SRO. In Public Health England, there was an SRO who spent a proportion of their time on this project. The intention when I took over responsibility for it at executive committee level was that we'd recruit a full-time SRO in accordance with best practice that the IPA would set out. We actually went out for a recruitment for that in 2023.
No one wanted the job.
There were some good applicants. We just didn't think any of them were the right fit for the project at the time. And then having not appointed, when we were in a stage where the project was essentially put on hold while we were going through review with the department about the alternative options, we decided it wasn't appropriate to appoint an SRO at that point because it would be hard to recruit someone for a project where the future was uncertain. And the IPA and others agreed that we should appoint a full-time SRO in advance of awarding the main construction contracts, which is the stage we haven't yet got to.
Okay, so you're going to be carrying on until then?
Carrying on, I mean, so the future of the programme clearly depends on the decision ministers take. Yeah. If we decide to stick with the Harlow option, I will carry on with executive committee responsibility, and we will at that point go out and recruit an SRO. If the decision is alternatively to go to the Porton option, our intention is that we would close down the current programme and we would start a new programme specifically dedicated to building high containment labs at Porton. And I think choice for my chief executive, but I think the ownership of that would probably best sit in the science group, which owns and operates the Porton.
So whatever happens, so you're keeping things ticking along until there's a decision, and then somebody will be recruited.
Correct.
To the SRO. Okay. Well, thank you for being an interim SRO. At least we've got somebody on top of it there. Mr. Richard Fuller, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Fuller's first meeting as a member of the Public Accounts. He may be on the floor with shock, but
it is my first time, so forgive me if I haven't learned the politeness and manners of this committee. But Sir Geoffrey said that this was probably one of the top 6 in terms of cost escalation, his long experience of Parliament. £530 million initial estimate to £3.2 billion. In the 2015 business case, it said by June 2021 the project would be complete. In the 2020 update, it said we might have designs by that completion date. And this is the Public Accounts Committee. Professor Dame Jenny Harries, you talked about lessons need to be learnt. The Second Permanent Secretary, Shona Dunn, talked about learnings. In my previous line of work, accountability meant accountability. not all of you were here or involved at the beginning. Who's accountable for one of these top 6 gross overruns in cost estimates?
I think I am the accounting officer. I am accountable as we go forward for the programme, but you are right that in fact none of my team here, because of the length of this programme, were involved at the start of this. So with a clear remit. I think the cost escalation, important to flag, because I agree this is a startling amount. The two things are, I think, was the cost inaccurately predicted at the start.
Who's been held accountable for that?
Well, the individuals who were previously in role and managing that will be scattered through the number of organisations that we've just described and are probably no longer in post.
So who was held accountable for that?
I think that is a good question, Mr. Fuller. But I think
Mr. Fuller, if your question is back in 2015, when it became apparent that 500 odd was 800 odd. Who is held accountable for that? I don't think anyone here on this panel will be able to give you a name.
Presumably you'll be able to find out it was a £300 million error. That person apparently is moving on into other aspects of the public sector, presumably making similar errors. So has that person been identified? Are they being held accountable for that? And we can go through the other. Who put together the original timeline? Are they being held accountable? My concern, Dame Meg, is coming to this committee the first time, if I'm going to be holding organisations accountable and my taxpayers for money that they have to earn and pay, I want to know that I don't have people here saying that lessons need to be learned. That I have people here who say, we understand our accountability, we've identified who is responsible, and here is how they have been held to account. So please can you give me a summary of those issues, on these issues? Who was accountable? How have they been held to account? What was the sanction?
So, Mr. Fuller, no, I can't, and I don't think anybody on this panel will be able to give you a name or
tell you precise
actions. I'm certainly willing to go and see whether the records are able to enlighten us on those points.
Yeah, and we can take this out of the room.
Absolutely.
I should just say to anyone who's interested, including Mr. Fuller, that we have at times brought back former civil servants to this committee. At one point we were going to have 3 permanent secretaries from one department. Sadly that was the day that PC Palmer was murdered, so it didn't take place, but because we want to bring people back to be held accountable. I think one of the challenges here, of course, is the UKHSA absorbed other parts of public health and is a new body, interestingly formed mid-year. Not that's at the door of Dame Jenny, who is chief executive, but that was a decision. So there are areas here, but I think Mr. Fuller's point is well made, that failure is too often an orphan when it comes to public policy, and we need to pursue it. So I think we'll leave that there for now, because we will pursue it outside this room. But thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. I'm now going to turn back to the Deputy Chair, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
I want to just catch up on one or two things that we haven't explored fully but have been asked already. Professor Harries, if you went for the Porton option, would you have to close the Porton laboratory down?
Not initially. So one of the positive or easier things about the Harlow site is it would be a site which is not live effectively. People would be working on it while the rest of our system was resilient and functioning, and then you would move over in an orderly way. With the Porton site, we clearly will have an operational site and we will have a build. Because of the stage of the proposal, decision not made, so some of this detail will have to come through shortly, but we would build at the same time as maintaining the current facility. The new H50 block would be a completely new build, so it's more to do with site security rather than getting in the way of actually the work that goes on routinely.
So there will be a significant element of new build, so it doesn't really make, from that point of view, much difference whether it's a Porton or Harlow.
Well, we are literally trying to, with the H50 block, I would just keep reinforcing that it's not just the block. You do need the CL3, the feed-in laboratories to this to make the system work. But we will be building almost exactly the same block that we were planning to build and have started to build at Harlow at Porton.
So, Miss Dunn, I'm a property man, I'm a chartered surveyor. I'm not at all an expert in building for L4 laboratories. But if you take an old building with serious defects, nearly always over a fairly short period of time, it costs more than either knocking it down and building a new one. So I'm really curious to know why The new buildings estimate to cost 3.2 billion, and the refurbishment is estimated to cost 2 billion, a gap of 1.2 billion. And I would put it to you, before you answer, that either the estimate of 3.2 billion is too high, or more likely the estimate of Porton Down of refurbishing and rebuilding, as Professor Harries has just said, is far too low.
So I will give you an initial answer, and then Mr. McPherson will want to come in with some more detail. The two figures are not comparing like Sir Geoffrey. So the 3.2 billion Harlow option covers a broader range of capabilities.
You're going to tell me the corporate headquarters and the training facility is going to cost 1.2 billion?
They cover a wider. It's not. I don't think it's just. Mr. McPherson will go into the details, but it's not just the HQ facilities and the training facilities. It is a wider range of capabilities at Harlow. The 2 billion, or the proposition for building something at Porton within the 2 billion is specifically for the H50. It's for the CL. It's for the high containment labs, and so it is a different proposition. And it would certainly be the case, and I think this is also clear within the NEO report, that there would be an expectation that beyond that period of time there may well be a wider investment required in Porton for some of the other facilities. But Mr. McPherson will want to add some detail.
Yeah, so as others have already set out, under both schemes we would build a new block that we've referred to as H50, which is the high containment laboratories. We've designed that in great detail to be built at Harlow. If we had to move to Porton, then we would take the designs we've spent a lot of time developing and build that block at Porton. And as Dame Jenny has said, that would be on part of the site that's separate from the operational facility, so we'd be able to continue running the Porton Down facility. The full Harlow scheme includes building a large number of other laboratories at containment levels 2 and 3 to fully replace the laboratories we've currently got at Colindale and the laboratories at Porton. The cost, as you've rightly pointed out, Sir Geoffrey, of the headquarters building and the office space is a relatively small part of the scheme. So the rest of the cost to make up the 3 billion is mostly made up of building other laboratories and an energy centre and a logistics centre and other essential operational facilities. The scheme at Harlow, the scheme at Porton, as Dame Jemmy has pointed out, is significantly smaller. So we would build the high containment facilities, and then within the 2 billion budget envelope, we would refurbish as much as the Porton estate and the Colindale estate as we can. But the 2 billion scheme is designed against a cost envelope, so that's the absolute limit on the totality of the works we would do. That would mean that quite a lot of the existing facilities at both Porton Down and Colindale would not have been refurbished within that 2 billion budget. And so at some point in the future, the agency would have to be coming back to the department with a new business case for further works in the 2030s and 2040s to fully upgrade the rest of the estate.
Which you wouldn't need if you went for the Harlow option.
Correct.
Are you able to give us either now, or I'm very happy to have a note on this, give a committee a note of what the breakdown of that 3.2 billion costs at Harlow is? The corporate headquarters, the training bit, the H2, the CL2 and CL3, the smaller, less sophisticated laboratories, and the CL4 laboratory, what the split is. Presumably the CL4 is 2 billion, or more or less, or whatever.
The CL4 is less than 2 billion, but I'm very happy to give you a breakdown of the costs of the different schemes.
That would be really helpful, thank you. And then, Professor Harris, using your expertise, on a sort of resilience point, isn't it better to have 2 laboratories rather than 1?
So the site, that was recognised at the start. The site, all sites are protected and have significant security around them, as I'm sure you'd expect. But the site at Harlow is designed effectively to operate as a resilient system in itself. So it may be on one site, but it would be able to effectively do exactly what Colindale and Porton are. So you can take parts of it out of service and put the other one in. So that has all been factored in to start with.
I was thinking of something catastrophic that would happen to that one site. There might be a serious leak, or it might get bombed or destroyed, or a flood or an earthquake or something. Surely all the planning of our predecessors was that better to have these things on several sites rather than one site.
So I think you'll forgive me. I clearly won't go into the absolute detail of security around the laboratories, but all of those sorts of things have been considered in the planning arrangements for assurance. by people other than myself and my immediate team. So I think they were rigorously assessed, and I'm sure any new business case for that also will be considered as we go forward. I would just add to the points that Mr McPherson's made, the costs of the Porton option are still very much, for obvious reasons, an estimate. So I'm just slightly anxious that we might come back again, and Mr Fuller would say, quite rightly, well, you said it was going to be under 2 billion, and this is what it is, because we will need to have more detail in it to understand what that true cost is as we go forward.
Hence my question to Ms Dunn. Either the 2 billion is too little or the 3.2 billion is too much.
So on those 2 points, the 2 billion represents part of the programme, as Mr McPherson has said.
2.45 billion, isn't it, the total cost for today? I think Mr.
Today, but there would be a forward case as well, whereas if you, as you've pointed out to Geoffrey, the totality of the cost for now, I mean, the Harlow site was building forward for 40, 50 years, so they're difficult comparisons. And then the other one, I think, is quite rightly we have been challenged on the costs of the build because it seems extraordinary, as do the lengths. But it's why we have been in discussion with international laboratories. But also I've noted, I think there are figures in the public domain around the DEFRA proposals, and if you take the last public figure for that and add in inflationary costs over the last 2.5 years, whichever it is, it comes out to a bit more than we're proposing. So as a rough benchmark, I don't think it is too far off. It's just a very big figure for a very specialised piece of required science, effectively.
And final question from me at the moment. As a layman, sort of 16 years seems, or if it's 12 years or whatever it is, 2036, seems a long construction time. Can you explain why it is so long?
I might refer to Mr McPherson in a moment. I mean, broadly, you have a planning phase, which we've noticed was very long. You have a build phase, which I'm going to say 5 to 6 years, roughly. The bit that really often gets missed out is the commissioning phase. So you cannot, this is the science bit, every single airlock, every single joint in the building, every component part of it has to be so perfectly sealed that it is safe for use, and that bringing into commission will take 1 to 2 years, I think. But Mr McPherson, is that?
You've got it right. So it does seem an extraordinarily long time period. At this point, we're really keen to make sure we're realistic. I mean, so if we look back at the history of the programme, it was clearly at the beginning unrealistically and optimistic about the timeframes, and that quite quickly proved to be wrong. So I'm very keen that the timetables we set out now are realistic. Broadly, there's around a year to get through ministerial decisions and a final business case approved. There's another year for some further design work and some local planning work. Roughly 2 years for procurement and for the contractors to be mobilising their teams, getting their supply chains in place. As Dame Jenny says, around 6 years construction period. That's for the high containment building, which takes the longest time period. And then 2 years for validation of that building once it's been constructed to get our staff up to speed through it and go through the regulatory approvals that are required. It does all seem an extraordinarily long time period, but that's driven by, as I say, by the particularly specialist nature of the high containment laboratories. Other aspects of the site would be built earlier than that.
So you benchmark with international facilities, Dame Jenny. Do they do it quicker in South Korea?
Yes. So there are different standards. So that is the other thing, depending on how what your standard is. And it's one of the reasons why actually that conversation is ongoing, if you like. We have a Korean delegation visiting UKHSA at the end of this week. So we are actively seeking to make those comparisons and set realistic programmes going forward, which both challenge us to deliver in a timely way, because that will actually reduce the overall cost, but doesn't diminish on the safety and security. And I think, the Harlow site was planned for quite a long life expectancy, and so some of that will vary a little bit depending on what life expectancy you are planning at the start of the process.
So can I just ask one more question, Chair, please? On this committee, when things really start to go wrong, as this has, you see what we call mission creep. And my worry is the longer it takes to make a decision, some scientists will come up and say, oh, the latest laboratory's got to have this gizmo or got to have that, and it's gone up by another few hundred million and then another few hundred million. So it's got to come a point where you have to say, this is the specification, we must get on with it. So how are you going to stop mission creep, Ms. Dunn?
So I completely agree with you. That is a thing that we see on numerous occasions, isn't it? One of the things that we've reflected on is how important it is that we have got really strong independent scrutiny of and challenge of that scope and specification as part of the work of the programme team. And I think we're very clear, Mr McPherson as the SRO might want to talk about this, that change control process is absolutely critical. I mean, the key thing right now, as both Dame Jenny and Mr McPherson have said, is to set the direction of travel and move forward on the overall programme business case, but as part of that, the scope needs to be fixed at that point in time with then a very rigorous change control process as part of the governance, which I know Mr McPherson is very seized of.
Once you've set the scope, not to alter it.
Indeed.
Hence the intention that if we were to change from the plan at Harlow to one at Porton, we would take the design of the building for high containment and essentially drop that at Porton without changing it.
But you'd have to go through planning.
Yes, we'll have to go through planning and a site master plan and work out the energy and water supplies and everything else.
But picking up to Jeffrey's point, that's exactly what we've done. We've had all sorts of suggestions, said actually we've reviewed, does this do the job, the original plan? Yes, it does. That's what we're staying with. But that also means that it reduces to some extent the potential for opportunities for others, so we can support the use of the space better going forward more efficiently for some of the, things like the fumigation changes. I think we can make it more efficient usage, but we when it comes to collaboration or what have you, if we start to change that model, we will set the whole thing back another 2, 3, 4 years. So I'm afraid I have sort of fairly rigidly stuck to the original model and a lift and shift proposal, having checked that still is the right thing for public health going forward.
Thank you. I mean, we actually think the view of this committee will be that's the right approach. Jonathan Chinoldi.
Thank you, Chair. To what extent will the 401 million already spent have to be written off if the programme does not go ahead at Harlow? Mr McPherson?
Yeah, so just the 401 million in the NA report was up to October of last year. Just to update the committee, the figure to the end of the financial year was 406 million. Of that, 295 million is classified in our accounts as assets under construction. So if we were to move from the Harlow scheme to Porton, that 295 million would almost certainly all be written off. Most of the rest of the money was revenue spend on things like design, which has already been through the accounts, and where we would retain some value, as we've just been discussing, for the design for the high containment building that we would move. And then the final element of the spend relates to 30 million for the purchase of the site and the buildings, and we would obviously hope to realise as much of that as possible through a sale of the site. So I think the key element that would be written off would be the 295 million assets under construction.
Okay, thank you. And Mr Dunn was talking about stopping mission creep, something I think we all agree with. So Mr Sanderson, for each year the programme is delayed, how much do you estimate the cost of the programme would increase by?
So I don't have that estimate to my fingertips. Mr McPherson may, but clearly that delay has been the biggest contributor to the increase in the estimated cost of the programme. So your underlying point that speed is important is well taken.
Right. Mr McPherson, do we have any figures?
I mean, we don't have a precise calculation, but I think if you take a 3 billion budget and if you assume 5% inflation, that's 150 million already without doing anything else. So the point we made earlier, delay just drives cost.
Right, and I think the other point made was that you're not going to do anything else.
School.
Emission creep.
Yes, so sorry, quite right. So, I mean, I think we haven't changed the specification and scope in recent years. In fact, I don't think we've changed it since we reformed as the UK Health Security Agency. And as Dame Jenny said, we're very focused on whichever option we do. We want our imperative is to get an agreement to a plan and then deliver it as quickly and efficiently as we can.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr Chinoldi. Sir Geoffrey from Brown, Deputy Chair.
Mr Dunn, what further analysis does the programme need, does the DHSA need from UKHSA before a decision can be made? Is there any further analysis? Or have we got so much from these 5 reviews that you don't need anything further?
I don't think there is any further analysis we need to get to the point of decision to set the clear direction of travel and move forward, as both Dame Jenny and Mr McPherson have said. The costings around a Porton option are high-level costings at the moment that have started from the perspective of the potential financial envelope available rather than a bottom-up calculation of the costs of that. So there's a lot of work to be done to develop that costing to a level of confidence that you would expect to see in a programme business case. And I think as part of that, or indeed as part of moving forward with a Harlow option, Mr McPherson talked about the need for us to look at a broader range of benefits, because I think what's become clear to us, and the NAO made this point very cogently in their report, was that actually having a fuller understanding of and ability to quantify the range of benefits that are available from either of these options actually helps with the investment decisions that need to be made. So I think there are a range of additional pieces of work that could be done that could build out that benefits case that would give us a clearer articulation of value for money and benefit cost ratios. That's all important work to be done.
So what other risks are you managing to get before you can get to a full business case?
So, as I say, I think those are the key things. We need clear direction of travel. We need to then move ahead with developing the next stage of the programme business case for whichever option we are moving forward with. Get that approved, and then move into to the identification of and procurement of main contractors, so that the process can move forward.
So when do you expect to be able to put it to ministers to get a decision? I'm not asking when they're going to make a decision. When are you going to be in a position to be able to put it to ministers for a decision?
A range of dates.
We have done all the work that is necessary for ministers to consider the issue. Ministers are considering the issue.
You could do it tomorrow.
It is already under consideration.
So I think maybe our sister committee could press ministers who appear in front of them, but not this committee.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask a question which is slightly unkind, but I think it needs asking. Given the other pressures that UKHSA is under, we've had a hearing very recently, so we know what those are, wouldn't it be better to take this whole thing out of UKHSA and have a separate delivery authority, such as the Olympic Delivery Authority, given that it is so complex, so expensive, so delayed, so important to the nation? Doesn't it deserve a separate delivery authority?
So, I mean, Sir Geoffrey, I think I don't think what you are suggesting is that the UKHSA would not be involved in such a programme, because I think it's a really critical point to make, and was one that came up consistently at our previous hearing, which is really important that that those people with both the accountability for the delivery of health protection capabilities and those people with the scientific and operational understanding of how the facilities and capabilities will be used are gripping the delivery of that. So I mean, I take your point entirely that there are, if you like, there are potential capabilities for kind of infrastructure procurement, for working with construction firms and so on, that may not be core capabilities for UKHSA. And what's important is that the department is working with UKHSA to make sure that those capabilities are brought into the programme team. I would rather do it that way than take the responsibility elsewhere, because I think the critical connection to UKHSA's accountabilities and their science and operational understanding of how to use the buildings is so important.
I hear your answer. Given where UKHSA, I like that, I can do it better than letters, are with their other problems, and the whole chronology and history of this programme, and the success of a really good delivery authority like the Olympics, might not that be a better model? It could still take advice from UKHSA in the areas where they need advice from, but this is essentially a very big, complex construction project.
And you couldn't recruit the right person to be an SRO for it, so that was quite significant.
You can, although to be fair, Chair and Sir Geoffrey, you can recruit the right person to be the SRO within UKHSA as much as you can out with UKHSA. And I hear the point you're making, Sir Geoffrey, but I think some of the issues that we were discussing at the last hearing to do with, that have occurred in the first couple of years of UKHSA's existence don't speak directly to delivery competence and capability, and I think they speak to other issues. But in this case, I think it's important that once that decision is made, we need to make sure this programme is set up to deliver with the right people in it.
Let's just try one more challenge. There's only so much management bandwidth.
Absolutely.
Whilst they're trying to get to grips with the financials, as we know from the previous hearings, trying to get to grips with this also, and all the other issues that UKHSA has to get to grips with, does seem to me quite a challenge.
Very broad shoulders.
Quite a challenge for Professor Harries or anybody else who's the chief executive.
And as ever with these things, we will always keep in mind what is best for the delivery of a critical piece of capability for the country. And I know that Dame Harries would want Dame Jenny, would want me to. Would want us to do that as well. Dame Jenny wouldn't wish us to.
Dame Jenny, have you got the bandwidth and the people to deal with it?
So I think, as you've alluded to, we were a new organisation. I know you know, Chair, we have had various changes mid-year in budgets to successive years, and we've had we were built flying the aeroplane, so to speak, in the middle of a pandemic. So the challenge is one I would like to think we are overcoming, and I'm looking forward, I hope, to meeting you at our next accounts. So I think I wouldn't want to accept that we can't deliver on it, and that we are, we're moving to a much more efficient organisation, as you would expect. Having said that, I'm also very open to the recognition we have multidisciplinary everything in the organisation, and why wouldn't I want the support of experts in delivering a big programme? The comment I would make, and it's perhaps a suggestion, is that this difficult interplay between people who understand, and that isn't necessarily me personally, the real risks around the construction, design, and the laboratory functionality is quite a critical component. And one of the things I would suggest I take away from this is actually just to check how other countries have done the delivery versus the professional input. It was part of the questions I was going to ask in more detail of some of our overseas colleagues to see how that plays out. And I think in all of them, but I stand to be corrected, that the, if you like, the professional organisation has had very significant input, if not direct control over the bill for those reasons. But I'm very open to thinking how we could look at that going forward.
Extemporise on this question. I am not suggesting that the laboratories would be taken away from UKHSA forever. They would simply be a new delivery authority to actually just deliver it, to do what it says, taking advice from UKHSA, but actually the delivery authority would produce the building itself.
Yes, I hear the point. I understand the point. I'm not misinterpreting it at all. And what I was saying earlier was is exactly what Professor Harries just said, which I know that Professor Harries would not want us to do anything that limits our ability to do this properly. So we will certainly consider that as we move forward on the programme, and as Dame Jenny has said, ask others how they have done it too, and take that into consideration.
Just a final observation was just actually the CL3, the new laboratories which were funded by the Vaccine Task Force, which are at Porton, and of course in this model then would be part of the new Porton. I mean they're in use now as the new Vaccine Development Evaluation Centre. They were built very rapidly. They're different to this. It's not the same model. But one of the success stories of the fast build was actually because the deliverers and the scientists, if you like, were working literally, well, its technical experts were working hand in hand. So the reason I'm slightly anxious is I don't think it is as simple as just delivering a bill.
I think but partly what Sir Geoffrey's driving at is the discipline of a delivery function.
And that I think is really welcome.
There's always a danger that experts want to add on. Yep. We look at this in defence a lot, bells, whistles and everything.
Quite well made.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Mr. Graham-Stringer.
If I can take up your point, Professor Harris, that you said you'd look at international experience on this. Have you looked to cooperate with UK experience where people have delivered large and complicated projects.
Do you mean in relation to these laboratories or projects generally?
Generally in this country there have been a lot of large projects, very complicated. So Geoffrey mentioned the Olympics, but there are others, some of which have gone well, some of which haven't. Have you looked at the UK experience? You say you're thinking of looking at international experience.
So the international experience was very much to do with the laboratories because we are relatively unique in the UK, and this is an area which is not really replicated.
I think Sir Geoffrey's point was big projects.
It's about the expertise.
Projects.
So very happy to. I mean, if you look at the timescales of this, and this, I'm very happy to be accountable going forward with the decision. Actually, we haven't had a build on this or a deliverable really since the UKHSA has been in place. I think we have had a decision. So, we're awaiting clear direction, I think, to ensure. So, absolutely, yes. I mean, clearly we have been working to all the infrastructure project programme standards, and that will set a standard, I think, for all the programmes. But it's an area where I think when we have the decision and we know what it is we're trying to deliver, we absolutely should be working on that.
Yes. Shona, every time HSA and its predecessors have been asked which is the most effective, efficient location for this, they've come back with Harlow. That's been stopped. What is the conflict? Why has Harlow not been accepted as it's been put forward regularly as the best option?
So I think the reason, and Ms McPherson made this point, the range of reasons that have led to the number of reviews have included sort of changes in strategic context, changes in organisation and the objectives for the country. But the issue in recent times has been a question of affordability. And I think the NAO report sets this out very clearly. The increase in anticipated costs of the Harlow site from the 1.9 billion to the 3.2 billion, and the question, and it's always, as you would expect, a question in any significant department around what the right use of public funds is at that scale. So ministers understandably wanted to understand what would be the options for staying within the financial envelope that was affordable at that time.
And if I can follow up Jonathan's question, he asked what are the costs for an annual delay or year's delay, and we were told that nobody knew. Why not? I would have thought that that was a fairly basic part of budgeting and risk analysis.
I'm happy to pick that to start with. I mean, I think for the Porton option, we actually do not yet have tied down tightly what those costs are, as we've explained, so it's difficult to estimate that. I think we can see what the costs have been for, in terms of delay for the Harlow site. In fact, they're evident, so we perhaps haven't produced a precise figure now, but we can put that out in a way. I think one of the key points about this, actually, in some of our conversations, is around the building in, and I'm sure my finance director colleague will give me the right terminology, but the risk going forward actually increases the cost quite considerably. So it's actually in projecting. These are potentially quite real with this programme, given there is a global push, if you like, towards creating more laboratories post-pandemic internationally. So the risk of ensuring contractors are available and the actual final delivery of the programme.
I'm just surprised that you come before the Public Accounts Committee and can't answer a simple question like that. But if I can just follow up what the point Richard was making about accountability. The answer was there's been too many people involved. As public servants who are trying to do your best to produce something for the public, something vital for the country, are you ashamed to be part of a project that has gone so badly wrong?
So I'm set on delivering the programme, which I hope is very evident from...
With respect, Professor, that wasn't the question. I've no doubt that you want to get the project right in the future. Why wouldn't you? I'm asking, this is an embarrassing project in terms of the financial overrun. As public servants, are you embarrassed about that?
I think as a member of the public, I'm a taxpaying member of the public, of course, it's the point Mr Fulham made, which is the public would seek to know where the finances are and delays in expenditure. It's a big sum of money, it will always be for this sort of programme, but a delay in delivery is not what we want to see. However, as we've discovered and described, there are constraints around this, and
but the constraints are... We recognise the constraints going forward, we recognise the challenge you've got, but I think Mr Stringer is asking a fair question. I mean, what do you feel about how it's been run so far, that it's got to this point before you inherited it? If we put it that way, perhaps.
So I am... I'm professionally saddened in some ways that I think what was a vision for a new science hub, that was the Harlow model, has not yet been delivered. I think, as many of you have pointed out, there are opportunities actually for things to be moved quickly using the right experience and the right skills, which are perhaps not always readily available all the time. I'm very keen to use those skills. So I say, as a new organisation working differently, particularly with both private and other parts of the public sector across government, I think there are opportunities to move this very quickly.
Ms Dunn, how do you feel Whitehall comes out from this?
I mean, clearly nobody would want a programme like this to play out in this way, and clearly it's been a very, very challenged programme, and it's had a number of occasions where it could have moved ahead and various issues have stopped it. I mean, Mr Stringer, I think everybody here on this panel has been focused on how do we get it moved forward, rather than going back and undertaking a kind of a forensic analysis of exactly who did what wrong. So I think we find it quite difficult to say, that there are particular things that absolutely should not have happened that did happen. I mean, to an earlier point, of course, one of the things we are very much engaged with the IPA on this programme, and one of the reasons we do that is in order to learn the lessons not only of our own experience on this programme, but of all programmes, so that we can try to get that right going forward. So clearly, I mean, I think I understand the point you're making entirely. Clearly, this is not how it should have played out, and it clearly has been a very challenged programme. And I accept that we've all got a responsibility to learn the lessons to make sure that doesn't happen in future.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer. Well, I think as we highlighted, the figures speak for themselves. It's gone up an awful lot in cost, and yet we don't see anything yet delivered, so deadlines have been missed. We take you on good faith that you promised certain things going forward, so we have those dates and deadlines, and we will, if it's not us, a successor committee will have them earmarked. I'm leaving a detailed handover note to whoever does this role after the next general election, and this is something that's absolutely critical to the safety of our country. So while we wish it well, we will continue to scrutinise it very closely. But can I thank our witnesses, Professor Dame Jenny Harries, Scott McPherson, Andrew Sanderson and Shona Dunn from the Department of Health, so the other three, of course, from UKHSA, very much indeed for their time. The transcript of this session will be available on the website uncorrected in the next couple of days, and we will be producing a full report on this after the Whitsun recess. Thank you very much indeed. Order, order.